Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we continue my top 100 board games of all time, covering games number 40 through 31. So let's not beat around the bush, let's get straight to the list with my number 40. And this game actually did not drop too many spots from last year. It was ranked number 42 last year, even though I did not play it at all in the entire year of 2021. And that game is Le Havre Inland Port, designed by Uwe Rosenberg. And this game is basically a two-player reiteration of Le Havre, but unlike Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small, which is the two-player implementation of Agricola, this actually makes the game feel very different. And for some people, that might be a little controversial because they like the way Le Havre plays. I do as well, no spoilers here. But this game is a refreshing take on the game. Instead of a worker placement game, players are managing two different boards. First of all, they have this dial here, which not only keeps track of the rounds that the game's going to play over. It's going to take about 12 rounds, but also this dial over here is going to tell you how many times you can play particular buildings that are found in each of the respective sectors. So depending on how you time things, you can trigger the actions of buildings 2 times on your turn, 3 times on your turn, 4 times on your turn. You can even pay a coin to get to your opponent to use one of their buildings, depending on what sector their building is on. And every time you use a building, you move it to the 0 sector. And as the dial continues to rotate and players wait and bide their time, the value of that building and its actions will increase. But you have to time it correctly, because if not, another player can pay to use your building, bringing it back to section 0, or worse yet, if you wait too long and don't have enough time to capitalize on those actions, if the dial rotates too many times, you actually lose that building altogether. And yes, you get compensated with half of the money, that building's value, but that's not going to be enough. And it's all about those coins, the value of the buildings, because that's going to be the sum of your victory points at the end of the game. Also, players are manipulating this grid right here, which represents their warehouse. And there's only 4 resources in this game, which basically strips things down from regular Le Havre, where there's like 8-10 resources that players are managing, spending, and converting. In this game, there is no resource conversion, but you are accruing and increasing your resources, and you indicate it by manipulating and moving your resource tiles or tokens here up and down, left and right across this grid. And the way you move and manipulate this grid is very intricate and very important and crucial to the victory in your game, because once you get to the end of a row, it's not as simple as moving up to the next row. You need particular ways of advancing your resources up and down this grid in order to spend your resources, not overspend them, and also to gain as many as possible in as efficient way as possible. It's a really cool puzzle. It's not for everybody, but I like this take on Le Havre, and that's why this game, even though I didn't play it last year, is still holding steady. Actually bumped up a few spots. My number 40, Le Havre Inland Port. And now we move on to my number 39, another game that was on the list last year. As a matter of fact, this one is a bit of a drop off. Number 20, actually, so it's bumped out almost 20 spots. And this is a game that I didn't play last year, just like Le Havre Inland Port, one of my favorite games of all time, and that's El Grande. And I'm not going to pull out the box because I own the big box of El Grande from Z-Man Games. And basically it comes with 5 expansions in the box. So you got everything you need to play El Grande. And I've only played the first 2 expansions, and I do enjoy them. Unfortunately, it's not a game that plays very well at 2 players. And I've had a hard time getting the right group of people to play a 3, 4, or 5 player game in the last year or so. Therefore, it hasn't played. But this game is such a streamlined game. It is such a elegant game. If there's a game in my collection that perhaps is worthy of that title, it's probably El Grande. It's not the greatest looking game, but for its time, the mid 1990s, it looks just fine. This game here is an area majority game. I am a big fan of area majority. And again, it does it in such a simple way. Players are partaking in a little bit of an auction for turn order at the beginning of each round. That's a mechanism I really enjoy in games. I do not like the mundane experience of just simply going in clockwise order and things never changing. I like when turn order is somehow impacted by the decisions you actually make in the game. And once players have determined turn order, they're going to be in turn order drafting particular action cards. And you're either going to choose an action card that gets you lots of meeples, your caballeros, that you get to place on the map of Spain, or you can choose to get a lower card that has less meeples, but perhaps has a more interesting and game-changing power or action that you can trigger. And based on the given circumstances, you're going to determine right then and there and what's available to you once the turn comes around to you. You're going to decide which of these action cards you want to take. Really cool. The expansions, they add a little bit more space, perhaps additional territories for players to vie over, a couple interesting new action cards that players can draft from, but nothing that necessarily rocks the boat or changes things too much. It just adds a little bit more additional nuance to the game. My number 39 board game of all time, El Grande. And now we move on to my number 38, and this is another game that's dropped down from the list. This game was ranked number 16 on my list last year, and I actually have played this game a couple times last year, except I only played it solo. I didn't play it multiplayer, and that might have affected it. My number 38 is Merkator, another game designed by Uwe Rosenberg. And as I mentioned, I only played this game solo a few times last year. And while I do think that this is one of Uwe Rosenberg's better solo games, I'm not a big fan of too many of Uwe's games and how they play solo. I think this game does just fine, but it still plays better at 2 or 3 players. This is basically a pickup and delivery contract fulfillment game where players are navigating the European market, if you will, the different countries in Europe and the Newfoundland as well. Here's the problem. This game is not a very good looking game. The board consists of a very abstracted map of Europe. And basically players are moving from place to place and they're drafting or recruiting resources, picking them up as they go to these different locations. And the resources are also not that pretty looking compared to some of the other wooden pieces you find in Uwe Rosenberg games. You do not have wooden pieces shaped in the likeness of the said or represented resource. Instead, you just have different colored cubes that represent all the different possible resources. As a matter of fact, there's 16 different resources in this game, and there's only 8 different colored cubes. So every cube can actually represent one of 2 resources, and based on where you put it in your individual warehouse, in your individual player board, that will determine what resource that represents. And all the while, players are gaining contracts and trying to fulfill those contracts by delivering those resource cubes to particular nations around Europe or in the New World. And when they do so, they fulfill a contract and are allowed to gain a new contract of the next highest level. As the game progresses, players are acquiring contracts that are more valuable in victory points, in coinage, but these contracts are also harder to fulfill. Really cool game. I like the ebb and flow of the game. I like the cadence of the game. The look is awful, but at the same time, the gameplay and the mechanisms are so sound that I can look past it. My number 38 board game of all time, Merkator. And now we move on to my number 37 board game of all time, and this game has also dropped down some spots from the list. This game was ranked number 21 on my list last year. Another game, I think I might have played it once or twice multiplayer, but I did play it a few times solo, and that is The Pursuit of Happiness. And this is basically the game of life for gamers. It's a worker placement game where players are basically simulating a life lived. Players start the game by drafting a character trait, which gives them a particular direction in the game. It gives them a special power, if you will, and it also gives them their particular set of starting resources, that is influence or knowledge or creativity and maybe even some money. And throughout the game, players are going through 8 different rounds potentially, and each of these rounds represents a different decade of your life. First of all, you have early teenage years, and then after that, you move into adulthood. And every year, you're doing different, making different decisions. You are trying to get a job. You are trying to start a relationship, maybe even start a family. You are acquiring different items for your household, for your own personal enjoyment. You are doing and partaking in different activities, maybe even taking upon some projects, some very important major projects. And all of these things are contributing to your long-term happiness. And your long-term happiness is basically your victory points. But you're also making decisions that impact your short-term happiness, which do have some benefits short-term and tactically for the players involved. Now, the thing about this game, as I said, potentially it could go up to 8 rounds, but that's very unlikely. As a matter of fact, the longest I ever lasted or lived in this game is 7 rounds, because unless you take some very drastic decisions early on in the game to prolong your life, reduce your stress, you are not going to make it to the 7th, much less the 8th decade or round in this game. There are so many things that happen throughout the course of the game that make the players accrue stress, and the stress shortens the lifespan of all the players. Now, rest assured that although you died, you could still win the game. Even if you were the first player to drop dead, if you were the player that lived the best, most satisfying life and ended with the most long-term happiness points, you will be the winner of the game. However, lasting as long as possible can be very helpful as you get yourself a little bit more time to make more decisions in order to accrue those victory points. It is really cool. I like the idea of just living a life according to the way I would want to live my own, or even just trying something different, shaking things up and making decisions that I would never even try or dare to do in real life. Really cool. My number 37 board game of all time, The Pursuit of Happiness. And now we move on to my number 36. And my number 36 is another drop from last year. This game was ranked number 25 last year. A game that I might have played a few times multiplayer. And I guess that's the reoccurring theme. These are games that thrive at multiplayer, although a lot of them do have solo variants. And if I did not get the game to the table too many times at a multiplayer setting, it probably impacted the game. This game was ranked number 25 this year. It's number 36, Race for the Galaxy by Thomas Lehman. And this game here, I had San Juan earlier in my list, prior, I think it was last time. And this game here is my favorite of the two. Very similar games, often compared. As a matter of fact, they were in production or pre-production around the same time. And this here is a space-themed game where players are trying to grow their empire, and their empire is depicted or represented by different cards that are either planets or they represent that represent different developments, technological developments. And all of these cards, not only do they give you special powers that you can use throughout the game, but they give you victory points. And whoever has the most victory points at the end of the game is the winner. Now, this is a multi-purpose card game where each of your cards can either represent a planet or development, as I mentioned, or they can represent resources produced by different production planets. You place them face down and they just represent a random resource according to the color of the planet. Or they can represent money, the cards that you pay or spend or discard in order to build or lay down other planet and development cards. Really cool. I like the challenge of it. I like the idea of the variable phase order, which in this game works a little bit differently than San Juan, where players simultaneously are choosing different actions that they have in their own little action deck. And if you choose a particular action from a particular phase, then you will be rewarded with an additional action. But if you are wise enough and can anticipate what your other opponents are picking around the table, you can pick a different action from the ones that they are picking and maximize and optimize how many actions you'll be able to take on that particular turn, because not only will you be able to piggyback on each of the actions that they chose, but you'll be able to take your own particular action with its respective benefit. Really cool. The science fiction theme is great. My number 36 board game of all time, Race for the Galaxy. My number 35 board game of all time is new to the list this year, and that is Coal Baron, designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling. And this duo, they've worked on many games over the years, many successful games, many former Spiel des Jahres winners, and this is not necessarily considered to be one of them. First of all, this is one of their less recognized games, more obscure games, if you will. Coal Baron here is not the prettiest looking game, even among their other designs. It's not the greatest looking game, but boy, do I like how this game plays. Basically, this is a worker placement game where players are trying to gain coal and distribute that coal or sell that coal for victory points. But throughout the game, players are taking part in this worker placement, and there's a bunch of different sections on the board that further divided among different actions. And whenever a player wants to take a particular action, they place a worker there if it's empty. However, throughout the course of the round, if you want to go to a place that's occupied with either another player's worker or workers, or occupied by your workers, then you can actually go there. However, what happens is you need to place workers in that location, at least one, or actually one higher than whatever is already there. So let's say a player already placed a worker there and you want to take that action, you're going to have to put 2 workers there. In the future, let's say you go to a worker placement site that already has 4 workers there, you're going to have to place 5 workers there in order to take that action. And players do start the round with 18 different workers, so you have a lot of workers to utilize, but you want to economize and make your decision and budget correctly in order to make the decisions that make the most sense. So you do not want to invest lots of workers if what you're getting in return is not worth it. And throughout the game, as the game unfolds, there's 3 rounds. Players are going to score victory points by having the majority in different categories at the end of each of the scoring rounds. And the scoring is very progressive because in the first round, there's only 5 different categories that you can score in. But by the end of the second round, there's 10 different categories that you can score in. And then by the end of the last round, there's like 14, 15 different categories that you're going to score points in. So you want to focus on what's at hand, the areas that you're going to score immediately right then and there. But you do not want to neglect the things that are long term because you want to set yourself up so that come those rounds, you'll be ready to capitalize and score as many points as possible. Really cool game. Like the worker placement. I like the scoring mechanism at the end of each of the rounds. My number 35 board game of all time, called Baron. And now we move on to my number 34, and this is another new game to the list. So there are some new games in this section of 10, more than there were last time. There was only one new game in last section. This game here is designed by Richard Garfield, and it's Keyforge. And Keyforge here is an interesting take on the, I guess, collectible card, trading card game model, because basically it's not quite a living card game like the other Fantasy Flight card games. This is a Fantasy Flight production. There is an element of randomness when you purchase a Keyforge product, but what's interesting about the model of this game is that every individual product is a deck, and when you buy a separate deck, you have a unique deck that nobody else in the world has, and it's very ready for play. It's already balanced to play, so it's not like you cannot use it or you have to make adjustments to it. You play it as it is, and that deck will have its strengths and its weaknesses. And there's a bunch of different factions in this game, and each deck is going to have 3 factions and some combination of the cards from the card list of each of these respective factions. And at this point, Keyforge has been very successful. They've got 4 or 5 different spin-off sets. This right here is the original base game, and I like the game. Basically, players are trying to unlock their keys by gaining a resource referred to as Ember, and after you get a certain amount of Ember, I believe it's 6, you turn them in and you unlock one of your 3 keys. The first player to unlock 3 keys is the winner of the game. But while players are doing it at the beginning of each round, they have to choose one of their 3 factions, and for that turn, they can only play cards or trigger cards from that particular faction. So you want to set yourself up so you can have some really powerful mega turns by waiting to call a faction's name for when the time is more apropos. Really cool. I like the model from a business perspective, and I like the game as well. Interested and curious to see where this game will rank the next time I work on my top 100. But for now, it's my number 34, Keyforge. And now we move on to my number 33. This game is not new to the list. It's a huge bump up. This game was ranked number 95 on my list last year. And this year it's number 33. Not sure if it'll be able to sustain this spot. But that game is Tiny Epic Defenders. And I've got a few of these Tiny Epic games on my top 100. And for those who are hating it, don't worry. This is my last one. This is my highest ranked game from the Tiny Epic series. I really like this game. It's very simple. I think it's probably the easiest Tiny Epic game to teach, with the exception of perhaps the original one, Tiny Epic Kingdoms. It is so basic, at least in its base game, but I really enjoy it. And I think one of the reasons why it bumped up on the list is because I've really explored lots of the different enemies, the epic foes, and lots of the different character combinations. I do play this game solo, controlling 2 to 3 characters at a time. I also play it cooperatively with some other players that I can gather and muster together. And it's always such an enjoyable experience. It's an interesting puzzle to crack, I guess. It's probably nothing more than that. And mechanically, it is much lighter than a lot of even the other Tiny Epic games, but for now it is such a charming game for me. I'm very excited about trying the expansion. I haven't tried the expansion yet. My number 33 board game of all time, Tiny Epic Defenders. And now we move on to my number 32, which was also on the list last year. As a matter of fact, it ranked number 34, so it's actually bumped up 2 spots. I did play this game a few times again last year and had a really good time with it, and that's Pirates Cove. And this game here, designed by Paul Randalls and Daniel Stahl and originally published by Days of Wonder Games, long out of print, classic pirate themed game. Really enjoy it. I love the idea. Players are basically at the beginning of the game partaking, or at the beginning of each round, partaking in simultaneous action selection through the use of this wheel dial here. And basically, there's a bunch of different symbols representing or corresponding with the different islands. And players are simultaneously choosing secretly which island they're going to go to on that round. And then they reveal it. And then all the players are going to go to said island. And if players end up on the same island as other pirates, that's going to trigger some combat. If there's multiple pirates, one by one, you're going to decide and attack one another until everybody has fled, except for one pirate ship. Everybody has fled to Pirates Cove, which is basically a safe haven for all pirates where no pirates can harm one another. However, the winners of these respective combats, they're going to gain fame. And fame is basically your victory points. And there's a lot of ways that you're going to gain fame throughout the game. Certain actions are going to gain you fame. Burying treasure at Treasure's Cove is going to gain you fame. Particular cards when you go to different islands are going to gain you fame. And destroying or defeating the epic pirates, the legendary pirates that are navigating the seven seas, even that is another way of gaining fame. However, beating a legendary pirate on your own is very difficult. Your best chance is to have another pirate or two, another player, an opponent, helping you team up against that legendary pirate. But I will say this. This game here, it's just such a fun experience because players have their ships, which are their little player boards, and they're divided into 4 different sections. And you got your hull, your storage section, you got your cannons and your crew, which are relevant for combat. The higher amount of crew and cannons you have, the common denominator of them will determine how many dice you roll during combat. And you also have your sails, and your sails basically determine how quick your ships are. The more sails you have, the higher initiative you have when combat is triggered. Really cool, really neat. I like the idea of the combat. I like the idea of the simultaneous action selection. I just like the way the game unfolds, and there are some special action cards that players can play that hurt or benefit themselves or hurt their opponents. Really neat. My number 32 board game of all time, Pirates Cove. And now, finally, for the last one on today's list, my number 31 board game of all time. And this game is also new to my list. I miscounted and misspoke. I said there was 2 new games on this section of top 10. There are actually 3. And this game here is Heroes of Terrinoth. And this game here by the Sadler brothers, Adam and Brady Sadler. This is a re-implementation of Warhammer Quest, the adventure card game, not to be confused with the classic Warhammer Quest, and not to be confused with Warhammer Conquest, which is another card game from Fantasy Flight. That game is out of print, and I'm sure Heroes of Terrinoth will soon be out of print if it's not already. But this game basically takes that same engine, that same system, and puts it into the Terrinoth universe, which is the flagship universe for Fantasy Flight games. And basically, players are taking on the role of a group of heroes. You could play this anywhere from 2 to 4 players. You could play this solo, controlling multiple characters as well. And players are going on the different quests. And I believe the base game here, well, the only box, because there is no expansions for the Terrinoth version of the game, it comes with 7 or 8 different quests or adventures. And they're all really cool. They're all really interesting. They all have their own epic big bad, their own boss that you will fight towards the end of the adventure. And they all have these different locations that players are going through one by one as they progress on this quest. And the cool thing is that players are battling different enemies, different monsters, and the monsters spawn in front of the player's area, and sometimes they're also in the shadows, lurking behind, where they could be even more dangerous. And players are taking their actions, and they have 4 different types of actions they could take. They could take a combat action to fight. They can take an exploration action to explore the current location and progress to the next chapter of the adventure. They can take a help action, which basically helps an opponent, providing them these particular tokens that are very helpful to them that they can contribute towards successes when they roll dice in the future. And finally, they can use the 4th action, which is a resting action. And what's really cool, the resting action helps you recover your lost health. What's really cool is that on your turn, you are going to activate, and you can activate by rotating one of those cards. And once you've rotated a card, you cannot use it again until it's refreshed. There are a couple ways of refreshing the cards, mainly through the use of your rest action card. And as the game progresses, you're going to be leveling up these actions. These are very basic starter actions, and you get to pick at certain intervals in the game to level up one of those 4 actions. So based on maybe what your other teammates are deciding, you will choose whether or not you might want to level up your combat, or perhaps you want to level up your exploration action. Really cool. I like the variety in the game as far as the different characters to choose from, the different monsters that you fight, the different bosses, and the different quests and what they present and the challenges that they offer. My number 31 board game of all time, Heroes of Terrinoth. And that's it for today's list, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here at When Harry Met Board Games. Please comment down below and tell me what you think about this particular set of 10 games. And don't miss us next time as we move in and cover games number 30 to 21. That's it for today's video, guys. Thank you for joining us. I'll catch you guys next time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.